Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Yoknapatawpha News Network, coming to you live from Jefferson, Mississippi in the year 19030. Our broadcast is brought to you by the Jefferson Drugstore, where we'll take you into the basement, give you some turpentine, and something else I can't mention over the airwaves. I'm Skeet McGowan, and here are today's top stories. Well, actually, we'll start with the top stories from 1865, seeing as in the radio hasn't been invented until 1897, and this being Mississippi and all. So, you know the Civil War everybody's been talking about? Guess what? We lost. We lost real bad, folks. Not only has the Union destroyed our Confederate States of America, but it has also freed the slaves and given them the right to vote. Not that I voted anyways, but I am still offended by this turn of events. Well, it appears as if other Southerners share my views on this particular subject and have decided to do something about it. Good for them. Within the Union wishing to reconstruct the Southern states in a process known as Reconstruction, don't know how they came up with that name, our good old boys have been pushing hard to prevent the blacks from voting and taking over our government. These practices include a literacy exam in which they be asked if they can read, which poses a problem seeing as I myself cannot read. Luckily, this is not as heavily enforced as the grandfather clause or the poll tax, measures taken in conjunction with the black codes, which I am sure will be around for a long time. In other news, the black codes have been repealed by the U.S. government. Luckily, some new laws have taken their place. Known as the Jim Crow laws, named after some crow named Jim, these laws prevent African Americans from gaining equality, as it should be. Unfortunately, these laws will be repealed in 1965, which hasn't happened yet. In addition to racial tensions, which are entirely the black man's fault, it turns out that smelly Northerners have decided to move in from the North. These Republicans, known as carpetbaggers, will team up with Southern Republicans, known as scalawags, to take over our government and influence said government in the Negroes' favor. In addition, these carpetbaggers intend to purchase our land and farm it, using African Americans as cheap labor. This competition will negatively affect the profits of Southern sharecroppers, resulting in financial hardship made even worse by the stock market crash, which hasn't happened yet. In other news, the stock market has crashed. Not literally, of course, as I had expected, but in a figurative manner, which I did not expect. The already hurting economy of the South plunges even lower, sending many families into poverty without food and shelter. Reconstruction, having not helped at all, leaves our region in a jumbled mess of messed jumbles, made even worse by the onslaught of World War I. Hopefully, the sequel, World War II, will be much better. All in all, Southern morale appears to be quite low. People are destitute, freed slaves are running amok, and it makes us yearn for a simpler time, when we can relax on the veranda and take a sip of turpentine from Jefferson's Drugstore. That's right, folks, Jefferson's Drugstore. If you're looking for an abortion, well, you got it. But on to more positive news. Since 1965, there has been an ongoing movement in literature and moving pictures, when they are invented, known as the Lost Cause movement, which at first sounded like a lost cause. However, once this journalistic investigator, by which I mean myself, journalistically investigated further, I discovered that, in actuality, this lost cause was a good thing. Turns out that these authors are writing books that glorify the antebellum South. Antebellum South, before war decided to mess things up. In these stories, we can see such characters as the Southern Belle, Southern Belle, and the Happy Negro, which to me seems like a contradiction in and of itself. Irregardless, these stories paint a picture of a simpler time when everybody was happy and carefree, and encourages Southerners, white Southerners that is, to carry on in the noble tradition of being noble and chivalrous, except to ethnic minorities and their women. Now the problem with such a literary movement is just that. It is a literary movement, and as I have mentioned before, I cannot read. Luckily, some have taken this into consideration and have decided to produce moving pictures which we can observe rather than readify, except that they are silent films, so we still must read. Irregardless, one of these films, a reported blockbuster, is D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation, and requires no reading in order to get its message. Brought to us by Jefferson's Drugstore, the only drugstore with pills made of talcum powder, The Birth of a Nation shows how villainous African Americans truly are, through such acts as raping white women and stuffing ballot boxes. The white men in blackface playing these characters give a realistic, horrifying performance. The film appeared so successful, in fact, that membership in the Ku Klux Klan is even greater than before, thus proving that children aren't the only ones who can run around in white sheets. Unfortunately, there are critics of this film, which surprises me, as it is the best and only film I have ever seen. The NAACP, or the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, strongly criticizes the racial views of this film. But what is even more troubling is that white authors have also criticized not only this film, but the entire Lost Cause movement as a whole. Mississippi native William Faulkner says that he is outraged that the South continues to perpetuate such negative racial stereotypes, but he is also upset with the South's gross ignorance of its own problems. Faulkner and other writers of the time believe that we are too firmly rooted in the past, and that such a traditional viewpoint is ruining our lifestyle, as we do not acknowledge the problems of now or the potential problems of the future. Because of this, Faulkner has decided to write a novel, good for him, that is titled As I Lay Dying, which according to 21st century critics is one of the most groundbreaking novels of the 20th century. In this book, Faulkner intends to prove that the actions of the Bundren family, based on tradition and customs, bring about their own downfall, which I find shocking because we all know that our downfall is the result of a black man voting. Even more shocking is the fact that Faulkner includes no African American characters whatsoever. It is just us white folk dealing with white folk problems brought about by a societal mentality rather than individualistic viewpoints. This station appreciates Mr. Faulkner's efforts, but would like to remind him that we cannot read. Thus, his message seems futile. This reporter, for one, believes that if Mr. Faulkner is so upset by the South's goings-on, he should just relax and have himself a bunch of bananas bought at the Jefferson Drugstore. Well, folks, that's about all we have time for now in terms of news. Stay tuned for a special interview with William Faulkner, who was the only one who would agree to appear on our station. Once again, I'm Skeet McGowan, broadcasting to you from the Yoknapatawpha News Network, which is brought to you by Jefferson's Drugstore, the only drugstore that you can keep your children in front of at 10 p.m. I'm Skeet McGowan. Good night.